To the Point with Michael Williams.
Good evening and welcome to this special edition of To the Point, the August 28th primary coming up fast tonight. Congressional District 18, the candidates, Republicans and Democrats, my guest on this special hour-long edition of our broadcast. Of course, Congressional District 18 covering Martin, St. Lucie, and parts of Palm Beach County. First, the Republicans. I'd like to introduce them. We have the incumbent, Brian Mast, a freshman seeking his second term in Congress. We also have Dave Cummings, real estate investor, and Dr. Mark Freeman. Dave Cummings had served in the Army and a police officer. Dr. Freeman, a businessman as well, Naval Reserve, and of course the congressman served in the Army overseas as well and saw combat duty. A quick explanation about our format tonight, roughly 1 minute to answer questions. There will be responses if someone is directly criticized. We hope to cover a wide array of topics this evening with our guest, both Republicans first and then Democrats. So we will begin with the chief issue facing so much of your district, the algae crisis. A $1.4 billion reservoirs in the offing. It's being fast-tracked for approval, not done yet, but there's high hope it will be. Even still, though, it would take many years for that reservoir to be completed, send water south, ease the strain of sending water east and west, which has contributed yet again to the algae crisis. And so the question, and we'll begin with you, Mr. Cummings, is what in the short term can and would you do as a newly elected freshman congressman to alleviate the pain right now?
I would immediately implement what are referred to as geotubes, which is a high-tech, low-cost solution that filters the water. We could get these in place within a matter of days, and we could catch the green algae in the tubes, and then as the water passes through on the backside, it would be clean. These would be set at the mouth of the C-44 canal, right where it goes into the estuary. This is a quick temporary solution to fix the problem.
Dr. Freeman.
Well, we could have an RFP to remove
a
the
request
algae.
for proposal?
Yes, to remove the algae. We could ask companies to come forward with their technology to vacuum the algae. And Brian Mast is going on the district trying to shift the blame on this, but he's the incumbent, so he should be accountable on this. And he took big bucks from Big Sugar.
Congressman, you may respond to that criticism, and also as well, what can we do in the short term, and what would you say your accomplishments have been to date as it regards the algae crisis?
There's a number of technologies that could be implemented out there. One of the issues in implementing those technologies is the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers won't pay for that under the Federal Stafford Act. They said they need to research technologies that can clean up to 4 million gallons a minute, which is the quantity of water that we're getting into the Treasure Coast as we speak. Now, the things that we've done to address this in the long term, fully funding the dike around Lake Okeechobee. This just came through, about $560 million to bring that to completion, probably about 2 years sooner than what it would otherwise be completed. I wrote the amendment to authorize the southern reservoir south of Lake Okeechobee. That went through the Water Resources and Development Act. I wrote the amendment to go out there and say we need to redo the Lake Okeechobee regulation schedule. That's the ladder of escalation for the Corps of Engineers to say this is when they send water, where they send water based upon the levels in Lake Okeechobee. And one last short-term thing is this. On August 18, we will be having a working group in Stuart, Florida with people from the Department of the Interior, South Florida Water Management District, the EPA, and a number of other entities from agriculture to municipalities around the state to get together and have this conversation. In the dry season, can we keep Lake Okeechobee at a substantially lower level so we don't have this problem in the wet season?
Dr. Freeman, many on the Treasure Coast are saying we need financial help right now. Many are being told that as part of the solution we need septic to sewer conversions. We've done stories where people are saying it's costing us many thousands of dollars we do not have. What, if elected, would you do immediately to try and alleviate that in terms of perhaps grant programs or other kinds of federal subsidy help for this area in such distress?
Well, maybe people don't really understand. There's two separate problems here. There's the problem with the lake and the estuaries and the blue-green algae, and then there's a separate problem along the coast with the septic tanks and the coliform bacteria. And in many ways, they're equal problems. They're both important.
How do you help people, though, who are saying they're spending thousands of dollars they don't have for septic to sewer conversion?
Well, we need city sewage. That's as simple as that.
But people who can't afford it, is there any program you'd have in mind, any push, any sway you think you'd have at the federal level for this area?
I think we need to get federal dollars to have sewage, a central sewage system, as they do in most cities, and that would solve the problem with a coliform bacteria that is leaching out of the septics along the coast in many, many homes.
Congressman Mast, same question to you. You've heard it, all of you have heard it. People say we just don't have the money for some of the fixes. We've done numerous stories of people say we understand the need. Is there anything that could be done at the federal level as a congressman to help them with those short-term needs during conversions like this and other needs that businesses will have as they try to clean up and survive economically and environmentally?
Absolutely. One of the most important pieces of legislation that I've worked on is one in short form. It's referred to as WIFIA. That stands for Water Infrastructure Financing and Innovation Act. This is a program that we've worked on doubling the scope of, and this is exactly for programs like that to go out there and give federal grants for converting for things like septic to sewer. We doubled the amount that goes into this. We're talking about tens of billions of dollars. And just to respond to the last comment very quickly, I don't take any money from the sugar industry. I'm one of only 3 members of Congress in the state of Florida to vote against sugar subsidies.
And since you brought it up, Dr. Freeman, your campaign, can you make the same?
Yeah, Brian, you've
taken no such money?
You did take $100,000 from Big Sugar. You gave back $12,000, and you claimed you gave it all back, but you kept $88,000.
Congressman, your response?
It's just simply not the truth. Any contributions that the sugar industry made to my campaign, this was in the last race, were returned to the sugar industry. And again, I'll just reiterate, there's only one person in the history of representing the 18th Congressional District or whatever district it was labeled before, anybody that's represented this area, there's only one person that's ever voted against sugar subsidies, and that's me.
Mr. Cummings, we'll move on. Mr.
Okay.
Cummings, any money from agricultural or sugar interests first? Brief answer on that, and then your answer for people who say we're in financial need now for our businesses, whether it's to survive this algae crisis because business may be down or septic to sewer. But first, the question on donations.
Sure. We've taken absolutely no corporate money of any kind. The only funds we've taken in my self-funded campaign are from small business and individuals. This is extremely intentional right off the front. I like to say that. Yeah.
And then the second and major part of the question for people on the Treasure Coast say we need financial help and we may need sustained financial help. What would you do? What could you do?
Great question. Most of the areas that we're talking about are low to moderate income situations. There are actually LMI funds that are out there with the federal government to enhance infrastructure, to enhance historic districts. And these are some of the primary areas that are being causing some of these problems. So the funds are there already. We would just go ahead as a congressman, reach out to those folks and see how much we have available. And then of course we could combine that with what is already in the budget. And to point on something, the first question, as you probably heard, there was a lot of talk from Congressman Mast, but there was absolutely no plan. And this is the problem. After 2 years in office, we have no plan. And we have a gentleman who's in office that was rated 23% as an environmentally conscious representative, and this is why we are where we are.
Brief response, sir.
Certainly, I think that rating of 23% comes from an entity known as the League of Conservation Voters. So if you want to know what the League of Conservation Voters cares about versus what they don't care about, they didn't care about our authorization of the Southern Storage Reservoir. They didn't care about the dollars that we put towards funding the dike around Lake Okeechobee. Things that they do care about, they wanted to make sure that we didn't vote for the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. That was something that the League of Conservation Voters cared for. And just recently, they wanted me to support putting federal dollars towards researching green nail salons. So I don't exist to represent think tanks like that, and I don't think anybody should try to represent them.
We want to move to another topic as we at least give our viewers a sense of where you stand on many of the important issues. Guns. The Parkland tragedy hangs over Florida, and all of our hearts go out to the families directly impacted by the Parkland massacre, the tragedy that has claimed so many lives and has impacted so many others. On guns, Dr. Freeman, you've made the Second Amendment the core of your campaign. Congressman Mast, after Parkland, you had a nationally recognized article in the New York Times calling for a ban on semi-automatic assault-style weapons, and Mr. Cummings, you called that, quote, lousy policy. Mr. Mast, your response about your view and your take on that ban that you called for.
Absolutely. You know, look, after Parkland, everybody agreed, Republican, Democrat, Independent, that the system failed on 1,000 different levels, from the federal level to the state level to the school board level, and that was the result of so many failures that need to be addressed. If everybody agrees that there was failures in the system, then I don't know how we look the American people in the eye without saying, let's pause, let's take a look at all of these failures, and then let's get back to the American people with the appropriate response.
And I would tell you, stand by the ban on semi-automatic assault rifles that you asked for then.
I stand by that bill that I wrote, absolutely.
And why fundamentally, at the end of the day, do you?
So let's look at what's constitutional and what's been upheld, because that's the fundamental purpose in our oath in being a member of Congress. I think that the late conservative thought leader, Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, he laid this out very well to pull in both the left and the right, and he said three important things. He said, number one, the Second Amendment is absolutely an individual right. It's not just for people in militias. He said that beyond that, it doesn't just respect firearms from the 1700s, it's also for all modern firearms as well, but he said it's not unlimited, and this pulls in people from both sides, and that's what we need to argue about.
Dr. Freeman, your response.
All right, when Brian did that, he betrayed the conservative base. The Second Amendment protects individuals against the tyranny of the state and against criminals who are going to come into their house and kill them or whatever. Now, the Second Amendment is the amendment that reinforces all other amendments. It means that people have rights to bear arms and protect themselves, as I said, against tyranny and against criminals. And I think when Brian said these things and wrote that article, he betrayed the conservative base.
You think a combat veteran who's seen these weapons up close betrayed the conservative base?
I do.
Mr. Cummings, you called it lousy policy. Why?
Absolutely. 1994, Bill Clinton signed the Assault Weapons Ban Act, and this was also not only different classes of firearms, but it was also high-capacity magazines. It failed at its purpose. We had Columbine, we had the DC snipers, we had the Bank of America Hollywood shootout, and these kinds of things. So clearly it didn't work. In fact, an after-action report was done by the Department of Justice that said this. It's not just my opinion. So it's lousy policy to blame the gun itself. And I also think it's really important that we not muddy the waters. When we're talking about the Heller decision, we're talking about military firearms, and the Department of Justice recently in a settlement described what military firearms are, and they said anything that's 50 caliber automatic fire and above. So let's be clear that that was not the same type of weapon that was used in some of these situations.
We're going to go to break, but as per the rules, since Dr. Freeman spoke about you, Congressman, a brief 15-second response to his claim.
Certainly. I carried these weapons in combat. I fired tens of thousands of rounds through these firearms, and the one thing that I can tell people is these firearms weren't put in my hands in combat to say, we hope this just gets you by. They were put in my hands to say, this is the most lethal thing that we can put in your hands to make sure you can go out there and eliminate our enemies. We're not a safer community for having unfettered access for every single person simply because they reached the age of 18 by accident.
Our Republican candidates, Congressional District 18, we can pick this up on the other side of the break, but we will take a quick break. We'll be right back with more on this primary debate, an hour-long edition of To the Point.